Hello, my name is Gareth Jelley. This is INTERZONE Pod, and today I'm talking to Dr. Una McCormack, the best-selling author of numerous Star Trek novels, novels for other franchises, and novels and short stories of her own as well. Thank you, Una, for coming on. To start with, could you kind of tell people basically like what you have coming out in the next couple of months in terms of sort of new books, because that's what we're kind of meeting today about. Let's get right to it.
Let's get right to it. Well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. So, I guess the book I've got out at the moment that people might be interested in is my most recent Star Trek PICARD novel,
Mm-hmm.
and that's called Second Self. It was slightly delayed in publication, so it's set between the first two seasons. Is it the first two seasons? Do you know, I'm losing track now. I think it's the first two seasons.
I think it is. I think it
But
is.
yeah, I know I can't, it's all merging into one great sort of chaotic thing. Yes, that's Picard Second Self.
Mm-hmm.
And then very soon, in the next month or so, I have a new Firefly novel coming out, which people may recall as the
Okay.
Joss Whedon space western, Horses in Space. So I've written one of those already called Carnival, and this one will be out, I think, in a few weeks' time. It's called Coup de Grace. So,
Wow.
or
Okay.
Coup de Grace.
Depending on who you are. So coup de grace, a nice political title there, coup de grace.
Yeah,
And there is a lot of kind of politics, I think, in a lot of what I've read of yours so far. I think you made a comment in an interview about how one reader had sort of read, your one of your novels as being a kind of historical novel, sort of set in another universe. It kind of has that kind of that feel of kind of history and politics running through it.
absolutely. I've got an essay on this coming out quite soon. It's a collection called Writing the Future, edited by Dan Coxon, which is coming out from Dead Ink. I wrote about historicals and science fiction, and I discussed Picard. I also discussed the new, most recent Star Wars series, Andor, which I absolutely loved. So anyone interested in that, it's going to be a great book, Writing the Future, from Dead Ink.
Andor's interesting because I haven't seen all of Andor actually. I've been sort of saving that. I've heard so much about it, but people did make comparisons to Blake Seven.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think you can see it there. It's the sort of uh, rough edge of rebellion. I think Andor has got the budget and the way that tastes have changed in television. Just the way they're able to produce a show like that now, it really doesn't pull any punches. It's absolutely, but honestly, I can't recommend it enough. I think it's terrific.
And getting back to your kind of your kind of Picard books and this new book, there's so much kind of going on about kind of it kind of jumps back in time structurally. It's quite kind of structurally it's really kind of intriguing and there's the characters. You mentioned how Raffi, you wanted kind of to sort of to sort
Yeah.
of write about Raffi. Could you sort of talk a little bit about where the kind of initial idea of that came from? And also you mentioned in an email how parts of the story with Garrick had been sort of in your mind for a very long time. Sort of how did that kind of novel come about?
So the interesting thing about doing the Star Trek novels is that for until the shows came back, we were more or less free to do what we wanted within reason. Yeah, you wouldn't kill someone. Though we killed off a few people as well, particularly David Mack did. Um, so we had about 20 years of extended universe material. And then, of course, the show came back, and they kind of went, well, that's it. We're drawing a line under it. So I'd been writing these books set mostly on Cardassia, and I had the idea for a third book in mind, and that's not going to happen. That's never going to happen. It's more or less scripted, plotted in my head. In fact, I've got about 50,000 words of it, which I wrote in lockdown for my own fun.
Okay.
But the book that sort of extended the beta universe, it was called, that got wrapped up in a sort of three-book, epic, death to all who come within the pages sort of thing. A really big kind of event because they wanted to wrap up those stories.
This is Coda.
Coda, that's the one, the Coda trilogy, yeah. And David Mack, Dayton Ward, and Jim Swallow sort of wrapped that up. But I had this sort of unfinished story, which was, my arc of redemption or otherwise for Garrick. Um, And when we came to do this book, I sort of said, oh, there were all these stories that I didn't really get a chance to wrap up. And I was working with Kirsten Beyer, who's co-creator of Picard, and was a Voyager novelist, and is our kind of point of liaison point, the person who sort of does the, make sure everything fits in with what they're doing on screen. And she said, well, just put what you can in this book. So I thought, God, I can't I? And it was really liberating. I kind of took, 15, 16 years of sort of creative investment when I'm free and threw it away and then just drilled into what counted about this story. But yeah, I think, like I said to you in email, some of these bits of story about Garrick, particularly the earlier stuff in the book, I've had sort of notes on for over 20 years. But before I was writing Deep Space Nine books professionally, it was my kind of backstory of a kind of critical moment in his life, and that was all present in my mind. So suddenly, I mean, they tell you never to throw anything away. Completely true. It was 20 odd years old, um, and suddenly this material became exactly what I needed to put in this book. So I felt like I was drawing a real line under a character that I'd been absorbed in and invested in for a very long time. And all of it came. I kind of tinkered with it. Hopefully my prose has got a bit better. But all that central story.
It's a beautiful book. I mean, it is one of those books where you read it and without spoiling anything, there are these moments where you sort of where I found myself kind of like flicking back and forth and kind of going, oh right,
oh
okay.
Yeah. Oh right. So yeah, well, good. I'm glad about that. I'm very glad about that.
It worked really well. And I think that's yeah. I mean, I'm going back to your earlier stuff as well. So that's fun too. And Enigma Tales is fantastic. I do like that one a lot. Talking about Picard the show, you mentioned this that you were writing. I mean, I'm kind of intrigued about your thoughts on Picard the show and Picard the character, and also kind of your kind of feelings a week or so, a couple of weeks after the Picard finale. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting season, hasn't it? I think it's just been completely different from everything else that we've had. I'm a big fan of the first season of Picard. Yeah, and partly it's because I was sort of, I mean, at a distance, I was kind of involved. Because to write my first Picard book is a prequel to that first season. It's the sort of story of why he resigns from Starfleet. So I was very involved in. I was getting scripts on a daily basis, and watching the story emerge. And the book came out just as the season was coming out. So I think it came out around about episode 4. So it kind of built on stuff that we were seeing there. So I was very involved in that. Not as far as you can be as one of the Time writers, and the scripts were beautiful. They're really they're I think if you could read them on the page, you can see the kind of novelist scripts. Yeah, those sort of this is a novelist's imagination being brought here. So I've had a lot of fondness for that first season, and a lot of fondness for many of the characters that come out, because I'd ended up writing them as younger people, like Jurati and Raffi in particular. So I have missed those characters a lot. I've got to say, I've really missed Raffi's there, obviously. I've really missed Jurati, Elnor and Rios. I've written a little bit to a lesser extent. I've missed them as well. So that's been a sort of that's been something I missed in season 3. I'm not saying it's a flaw in season 3. Yeah, it's because season 3 is doing something completely different, and what season 3 is doing is bringing back all those legacy characters. And on the whole, I think it's done a nice job of doing that. You've been pleased to see people back on screen again. I would have to say that probably my favourite combination was Raffi and Worf. Who I thought were a really interesting set of people to get put together. Worf's sort of story. He He reminds me, I don't know how well you know Doctor Who, but there's a Sontaran called Strax, and he's kind of, yeah. Oh, he's a Sontaran that owes the Doctor for saving his life, so he becomes a
Rings a
nurse.
bell. It rings a little bell.
And he's constantly saying things like, you have a wound on your left arm. Apply this poultice for the next 6 hours, and may your children's blood die in the veins of you. So he's kind of, he's still got the performance of a Sontaran whilst he's sort of making people better. And every time Worf came on, I was going, he's doing Strax. It's absolutely brilliant. So I enjoyed that Worf very much. And then, of course, there's loads of stuff going on visually that I will almost certainly miss, like stuff in the background or particular ships and that sort of thing. So there's lots that I'm probably missing that other people are getting a lot of enjoyment from. I thought it was a fun season. I think I would have, when you sort of sit and look back at it, I kind of go, oh, it does turn out to be a story about fathers and sons, yeah. Which is quite, it's quite old fashioned. And I wonder what those final scenes would have looked like if instead of Jack, Picard, and Riker, we'd had Beverly, Troy, and Jacqueline. And yeah, something in my heart longs, wishes that we'd seen that. But that last 20 minutes, take a hard heart not to enjoy that, I think. So
they were really kind of like packing in the sort of fan service. I mean, it had lots of moments, but at the end in particular,
they really were. I've watched it back a few times, yeah. And it is. Did you enjoy it? What did you think?
I thought it's funny you mentioned about the character, about Jack. I suppose when he was introduced at the very beginning, it seemed almost too kind of like boy's own type adventure sort of character coming in, and I thought, and I had a little bit of trouble kind of getting into the character at the beginning, and then the character grew, because obviously they were doing something, doing certain things deliberately, but I don't know about the ending. I think it was very satisfying, but I think as a story, I was sort of I was a bit puzzled by certain things, by certain choices.
It's a small C conservative narrative, It's and I don't mean that disparagingly, because one of the functions of comedy, not sitcom, but comedy as a kind of form, is the you disrupt things and then order is restored. Yes, so I think one of the ways in which this exhibits is that everyone ends up in Starfleet at the end. Yeah. So it was the logical point that everyone will go. The logical point is that Seven will become the captain. Raffi will become her number one, and Jack, of course, will enter Starfleet because that's what his parents did. I think I said to somebody online, I said to them that probably one of the most radical things that DS9 ever did was when Jake said to Sisko, "Do you know what, Dad? I don't think I'll join Starfleet." And Sisko said, "Yeah, that's great. Find your own way." But, it's like the Borg assimilating. So it always makes me laugh when people end up in Starfleet, I think.
Yeah, loads of interesting things. I mean, at the same time, you mentioned, the kind of ships and there was also there's a musical cue at one point from Voyager when they're in the museum.
Yeah.
And there are some really kind of, they really are kind of like pulling on,
everything,
pulling on certain strings.
Yeah. I was there for it. The last 20 minutes in particular, perfectly happy to sit through all that. And I think it does, it acknowledges their aging and the bit of Worf falling asleep. That's all very funny, very funny. And I'll tell you what it has done. It's made me go back and watch some Next Gen. So I sort of went back to Encounter at Farpoint and put that on. And I skipped a few of those very early ones. But I thought, you know what? I don't need to watch Code of Honor ever again.
Let combat continue until there is a victor. It will not be interrupted.
So I've kind of skipped forward to some of the, the more fun ones.
It's funny. It's funny you mentioned Encounter at Farpoint because you have Q there, and I do wonder how what they're going to do with the next show. I assume.
Well, I think they're definitely wrapping up Picard, aren't they? That's the last season now. But I know there's been a lot of talk on Twitter, and certainly Terry Matalis has been tweeting about a kind of Star Trek legacy show. I don't know if that's going to be a seven-led ship or whatever. I will say, poor old Generation X did pretty badly out of this. I thought the Boomers and the Millennials did fine, but then people like Shaw and Ro Laren, it was bullet to the brain, wasn't it?
Yeah. Sure didn't. Sure didn't do very well. I was disappointed there. Apparently, I think I saw something on Twitter that there were plans to bring him back somehow. I don't know how they're going to do that, but
Fan favorite, I think. Maybe it was one of those things where they, there's always a breakout character, and they never know who it's going to be, and then everyone's going, "Oh my God, this is the best character we've had in Star Trek for ages," and the writers are going, "Shit, we've seen episode 9." But they've got the transporter, haven't they? Which they can revive anyone from a buffer.
Presumably, yeah. You do wonder to transport attack now, and what they can do. I'm sure someone will write something. I mean, if they've been the things they did with the characters and transporters in Voyager, I'm sure they can figure something out.
And except poor Tuvix.
Yeah.
But it never, it's never slowed Data down, has it? There's how many versions of Data have there been? The soon.
Yeah,
so there's always a Tom Riker character. I'm sure he'll be back. He was too good.
And while you were watching season 3, were there kind of moments where you thought, as a writer, like, oh, I'd like to explore that more, or you mentioned how it's a fascinating thought experiment. That if they sort of switched the genders, of Jack, but were there other kind of characters that you thought, oh, I'd love to kind of follow that thread or write more about that?
So certainly that aspect of that sort of invisible motherhood, I thought was very interesting. Although the way that motherhood can be invisibilized, I really wanted to get into I think because they opened this can of worms. I think we really needed to get into it, which was about the changeling, the attempted changeling genocide, and you sort of think, well, that one's been opened now. And we've seen some of what was perhaps done to Vadik in the name of that. And I want to see these people up at The Hague. These are bad people. Yeah, they try to eradicate. So and the only other person who tries to eradicate the changelings in Deep Space Nine is a particularly unpleasant character called Inar Brentane, who's Garak's dad. He's like the villain. So I thought if we're going to go there with changeling attempted genocide by people in Starfleet, I'd really like to see that one sort of dealt with fully, because they're quite harrowing, the things that we see happen to Vadik. So I'd like that one done.
And in your book, you I mean, it's Raffi's book, right? It's very much like her story. It's a Picard novel, but it's sort of, for me, it was Raffi's story. What is it that kind of drew you to that character when you were watching season 1? And are there more like do you have more kind of ideas for how to write about Raffi in the future?
Oh, I'd love to do some more Raffi. I really would. I think actually what drew me to her writing the first book, which was the prequel book, was that a lot of her story in that is about her estrangement from her family. It's about her kind of prioritizing her Starfleet, what's required from her from Starfleet, over her husband and small child. And I was writing the book in quite a hurry, just as the way these things happen, writing TV books. And there was a lot of me saying to my family, I promise this won't go on indefinitely. But Mummy will be back next weekend. Yes. So that was really what I identified with Raffi, and I think I was a comparatively new mother. So to write about that experience, those sorts of dual demands upon self, when you've only got so much to give. And then obviously it's a Star Trek space opera book, so you kind of, mine is just in the context of writing a book, but Raffi's in the context of kind of like a intergalactic humanitarian disaster. Yeah. So that's sort of that's how I found my way into Raffi. And then in Second Self, you're looking at someone who's relatively late in life, or 50s or whatever she is trying to start again, is trying to pick up the pieces. And I find it's a lovely performance. There's a lot of toughness to Raffi, obviously, but then there's also a great deal of vulnerability and tenderness and love in her. And I find her a really attractive character to think about and write about. So I'd happily write some more. I mean, we're seeing her as number one now, so stepping into the Riker role. So some more of that friendship with Seven of Nine, that relationship.
Yeah.
How's that going to work? Yeah. See a bit more of that on screen, how that perhaps they have to navigate that on the ship. All interesting stuff.
Yeah, lots of loads of interesting threads, and I'm assuming there will be. I mean, do you know much about what's happening with the Picard books, or do you are you the last to know?
Oh no, I never know anything. Yeah. All I know is the moment where I get an email saying, "So, do you want to do an X book?" And I go, "Yes, please." And that's literally all I know. And then you kind of get folded into the loop a little bit, and then you sort of you kind of unfold. But literally, that's all I ever hear. I kind of get an email saying, "Do you want to do an X book?" And I go, "Yeah, that'd be great." And then that's the next thing. So absolutely no idea. There's plenty of scope for the story. I think there are 4 books now, aren't there?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there could be a Fenris Ranger one with 7, or but who knows if they are planning a show with 7 as Captain of the Enterprise. That's going to be a completely different show, isn't it? That's going to be were they calling it Legacy? I think online. But
is that what it's? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, that was just that. I don't know if that's from the writers' team or whether it's from something the fans came up with. But that's what people were making kind of mock-up posters for. But who knows? We'll see.
Right.
Got to get through the writers' strike first. So yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned kind of that point about genocide, and your background is in sociology, and there's a great line in an interview. You said you were quite a bad sociologist, and you found that science fiction turned out to be a better way of sort of maybe exploring some of these things. Are you always coming to your writing with that sort of sociological layer in mind? Are you always sort of thinking about that when you frame things?
I think so. But I think I'm always trying to find because I write very close to the characters. I think I'm always certainly to be able to write fiction well, you have to be close to these people and feel what they're feeling. No, you don't necessarily have to agree with their responses or even with particularly in Garrett's case, their ideologies, but you do have to feel the way that they feel. And yet, I was lucky to just find this extremely nice niche where, I could do all of those things that maybe a literary fiction writer would do, but I could do it in space. Yeah. And not just space, but in like Star Trek space. Yeah. So,
yeah.
So at every level, there's a kind of abstraction, or maybe a an extra element of hyper realism. And yet at the heart, these stories are always personal. They're always about the choices, for good or bad, that people are making and the reasons why they're doing that. So I know some people think that I've read some reviews, not that I read reviews, that say, the aliens don't feel alien enough. And I think that's a fair cop. And some people, read science fiction because they really want that feeling of estrangement. And what I read and write it for is that this feeling of slight abstraction, that I want to get closer to the experience of being what it means or feels like to be human. But I do that kind of in an abstracted way through, space lizards. Why not?
Space. Yeah. No. Well, it's a great job, right?
I know. I was saying this the other night. I was giving a talk to some college students on Tuesday night, and I said, nobody ever mentioned this at the careers office. This was like, nobody said, Una, those books you sit and read with Tasha Yar on the front, somebody writes them, and that's a job. It's not a well-paid one, but, it's not bad. Keep you in chips. But nobody mentions that. But we find these niches, I think. Yeah.
That's fantastic. You mentioned how sort of like the essay you have coming out in the Dan Coxon collection. Is that right?
Yeah.
What's the name of that one? It's slipped my mind.
It's called Writing the Future. They've done a series of them through Dead Ink. There's Writing the Uncanny as well, which is a fantastic collection. And this is the next one, which is about science fiction.
And yeah, it's Dead Ink, and it some sad news yesterday that sort of Unsung Stories has decided to kind of close down, and sort of Dan Coxon is involved there as well.
That's right.
You have involvement. You've been involved with these big franchises, but you're also kind of you're involved with smaller press stuff, and you've worked with like Ian Waits at New Con, and the kind of whole range of things. Do you feel like this is a really good time for publishing in terms of sort of small press publishing, or do you think that this is looking at it from your perspective, that it's sort of more difficult now for sort of not just small presses but for writers coming in?
Yeah, it's an absolutely terrible time. It's awful, and there are various reasons for this, but I mean we can't underestimate things like things as simple as the cost of paper becoming so expensive. It's punishingly expensive to print a book. I think it's amazing that Unsung, what they've done has just been incredible. Those books are beautiful and original and genre bending, and they pick up awards and short listings. And if a press like that, which is doing incredible work, can't survive in some way, there's something gone badly wrong with the whole ecosystem. It's like a sort of a loss of species diversity, isn't it? Something has gone wrong with whatever structures are in place. It's not good. It's almost like you're either Stephen King, or you can't find these little niches anymore. And these niches should be there because that's how we get diversity of voice and diversity of experience and a better literary culture. I'm doing a little bit with my work with Gold SF, which is an imprint I'm involved with that's looking for new voices in intersectional feminist science fiction. And we're lucky there in that the press sort of operates like an indie, but it's supported institutionally by Goldsmiths University. So it's part of Goldsmiths Press. And the press is a university press. It's got connections, distribution by MIT as well, MIT Press. So it's like we've got some of the buffer that you can get from a big institution, but the freedom to operate like an independent. So it's working for the moment, it's just heartbreaking to see something like Unsung just have to say we can't. There's not a way we can do this anymore, because they should be flourishing, I think.
Yeah, brilliant books. I mean, if anyone's listening hasn't found Unsung Stories, they I'm trying to think of the ones. The first one I read was probably Dark River by Reem Kashasha.
Yeah,
that's a fantastic novel. And there's also Gigantic, which is really funny and really, really smart by Ashley Stokes. So if you want to find some interesting genre bending, writing, do check them out.
I'd recommend, if you're interested in weird or sort of British weird, then they publish Malcolm Devlin, who's one of the best short story writers in the UK.
Devlin's amazing, yeah.
science fiction where it sort of segues into weird. There's Aaliyah Whiteley. They published her book, The Beauty, and then just lots of like didn't they publish Dark Star? I can't remember who it's by now. It's a sort of novel length poem. There's just some incredible stuff. One of their books just got shortlisted for the BSFA Best Novel, The Coral Bones. How can you have put out a book that was shortlisted for an award and then the press is having to? It's just
It's sad. It's
yeah,
really It's
yeah. And that's structure. That's the way we choose to finance and support the arts. Yeah. So it's there are reasons that we are losing these things, and it's daft. Yeah.
Ending on or wrapping up on a more positive note about gold. Are there maybe some of the sort of gold SF titles that you'd like to sort of highlight or point people towards?
Oh, well, there are two out at the moment. So our first two books came out. We've got a collection of poetry called by Jessie Randall, which is about women in STEM. So that was our first book. We said we're going to publish feminist science fiction, and we're going to publish a book of poetry.
Poems about mathematicians, isn't it?
It's called Mathematics for Ladies, but it's not just about mathematicians. It's poetry. It's poems about women in STEM, and they're not. There's poems about Marie Curie and Jocelyn Bell Burnell. So it's the whole gamut. But Mathematics for Ladies is a particular quotation that becomes relevant. And then our first novel we published a few months ago, and that is Empathy by Hoa Pham, who is an Australian science fiction writer. And her novellas came in, and we were sort of reading these, going, yeah, these are the real deal, and they deserve a kind of. I think they've had a small press publication in Australia and gone out of print, and we looked at them and went, yeah, these have got to come into print. So Empathy is about a drug that people can take that gives them empathy, and surrounds a group of cloned sisters. It's great. It's really, really good. Our next two are coming out in June and July. We have The Disinformation War by S.J. Groenewegen, which is a sort of near future Britain. And so what I like about this book is that not only do we see the dystopia, we see the path to resistance, or the start of a path to resistance, which I often think science fiction isn't very good at. Yeah, because it's like concrete thinking. Here's dystopia, or here's utopia. Well, what's the pathway? And then the next book is is called The Ghostwriters by M.J. Maloney, and that's that's a sort of near future British semi dystopia. Yeah, and that's great. That's a really good sort of that has a very literary flavour. I think they're good books, and I just hope people are really buy them, read them, get them for your friends. Put them in the Christmas stocking, and let's keep these diverse voices, keep these spaces alive. I think so. That's Gold SF, and then hopefully we can announce some more quite soon, because we've got some lovely things lined up that I'm excited about people reading.
Oh, that sounds very exciting. And just to remind people, your book, Second Self, is out now in hardback and coming out in paperback very soon. There's right. Also the autobiography of Spock, which is out now, and which is which I've started on, and which is really, really interesting. And I think you do choose these great characters. So that's a great one. They
come to me. I've also got the autobiography of Catherine Janeway, if people are more Voyager fans. So that's there. And then the usual lots of Star Trek books, Deep Space Nine, done a couple based on Discovery, and my Firefly book is coming as well.
And we should give a mention the Big Finish box set. The
oh heaven!
We haven't talked about your Blake 7 book, have we?
I know, but gosh, I can hear the PR people going, Una, what are you doing? So I'm glad you're
on the door,
here. Right? Don't forget. So, yes, of course, and it was one of my bucket list as well to do a Blake 7 novel. Yes, Big Finish have just put out a beautiful box set edition of novelizations of the first 14 scripts of Blake 7, all of which were written by Terry Nations. So we had kind of access to very early drafts, and we could pick and choose bits from those if we liked. And 7 lovely books in this gorgeous box set. It's like Christmas morning.
You'll need a very big stocking for that one. But
You will, yeah. Put your big boy shoes
definitely.
on.
No, that's wonderful. And you can read. Chris Funnell has written a really fascinating kind of interview article for INTERZONE Digital. So you can find out more about those over on interzone.digital, and you can find out about INTERZONE and subscribe, hopefully, or pre-order at interzone.press. You're listening to INTERZONE Pod. My name is Gareth Jelley. I'm the editor of INTERZONE, and I've been talking to Dr. Una McCormack. Thank you very much, Una, for coming on.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.